Welcome to another episode of Timo's Dinky Detailing. Today I'm going to be doing a Dinky 153 Vanguard with spats. So this is a play-worn car in a light blue color. It's not if it was a maroon or a dark blue, it would be a rare color. This isn't. I plan to do a bit of a Resto-Mod on this one, so it's not going to be blue. I'll have a look at some other color a little bit later. First step is we got to take off the base, and I like to start with a center drill, and I can get into these rivets right down the middle because there's like already a hole in the middle, and this way I figure I'm already starting and I can guide the tap drill later on. Then I go in with the drill that's been sharpened a little bit more flat. It keeps slipping off of the rivets. Both back rivets, it's not on center. So I'm going to file down the part that's still sticking up, and maybe I'll be able to get the rivets drilled out. Okay, that's a little better. It's a tricky thing to figure out how to get these things so you're drilling on the center of the rivets. So a little leverage with a screwdriver and up it comes. So now you'll notice that there's no mushrooms on the ends of the rear axle because it doesn't need them. The spats hold the wheels in place. The front axle is easy as well because once you pull the axle out of the body, the wheels are free to move around, so you can grind the mushroom off the end without having any danger of damaging the hubs or the bodywork. So now I'm going to drill into the casting so that I can tap a hole in each of the 3 places where there was a rivet and replace the rivet with a screw. And I'm going to be using a 440 screw. Nowadays it's hard to even get these things. Everything is metric, but this is a 440 tap. It's a Osborne Blue Wizard. I've got these kinds of expensive tools, and I don't want to start getting metric tools if I can keep using the good quality Imperial tools that I have. So I'm tapping these out, and so that I can fit 440 button head screws that when they're in there, here's one, the button head looks like the head of a rivet. So in the end, you can still take it apart again, but it looks somewhat authentic. It looks actually more tidy than the original model. I put those in there so it protects the thread, but also I'll be painting those as I paint the body. So on this front axle, what I'm doing is squashing down the mushroom on the end so that I'm not losing as much material as you could do it if you're grinding it off or filing it off. And I'll turn it and squash it until I've moved enough material, and then I'll just take the rest off with a file. There, that was easy. Now these tires are obviously in rough condition. Would love to save them, but there's no hope. They break apart completely. They're cracked and they're very brittle. So they are done. I'm going to have to find a better solution for them. So now it's time to strip the paint off of it. I'm using this paint stripper. I can't recommend it. It's what I got off the internet. We're still on lockdown, so it's hard to get stuff, and so this is whatever I got on Amazon. And I spread this stuff. It's kind of a gel, and let's let it work for a while. Come back a little later, see if it's done its job. Looks like it's wrinkled it up a little bit, I take my toothbrush to it. That toothbrush, I took a torch and melted it so that I could bend it in a better shape. It winds up being easier to brush at, but it's taken off most of the paint from the body. The base doesn't look like it's done such a good job. Let's see how it goes with the hubs. Uh-oh. Looks like my vinyl gloves have been dissolved by the paint stripper. So there must be some kind of chemicals in there. So now I've got a nitrile glove. Nothing's going to happen to that one. But it looks like the paint is staying on the base. It's not coming off. I'm able to get the paint off of the hubs. And now I take all of it into the sink and rinse it off. This stuff rinses off with water, and it kind of takes the effect away, so it's not corrosive after it's been rinsed with the water. It's all these safe materials, but it doesn't strip quite so well as some stronger stuff would be. But then again, I'm stuck inside, so it's just as well. So that's got most of the paint off of the body. It's done a really good job with the hubs. I don't see any paint on those at all. Oops. So they look perfect. Now the base still looks like it's covered in paint. So for that I'm going to use a different trick, because I've run into this before, and what I'm going to use is some stuff called Evap-O-Rust. This is a rust remover that is super safe. So I'll pour it into a container, and what you do is you put your rusty item, in this case the base, and it's super safe, so it's not really harsh chemicals. I'll put the axles in as well, and you have to leave it in there for a long time for it to work. So we'll leave it overnight and have a look at how it's come. Okay, it looks the same, but I've been here before, so I'm just going to get my toothbrush out. Whoa, there we go. What's happened, I believe, is that the paint has bonded with the rust so that the paint stripper can't take it off. But the Evap-O-Rust dissolves the rust, and then there's nothing left for the paint to hold on to. So it takes it off completely. There, it's almost perfect. Just brush off a little bit with the wire brush, but there is no rust left on that. Whatever's left there would come off anyway. There's a little bit of blue paint you can see on the casting, so I'm going to take the brass bristle wire brush and get it out of those little tiny cavities, and it works pretty well. So now I also give a little bit of a brush to the hubs. They have a little bit of powdery stuff on them after paint stripper. Now on these hubs, all of them have the same little thing sticking up from the casting. Don't know what that is, but it's on all of the hubs, and when I look online, it's on all of them there too. So I'm going to try and put those on the outside. So the base is a little bit bent from when I pulled it off, so we'll just straighten it out. I've got a pair of pliers that are ground smooth, and they're parallel pliers, perfect for doing this. So for the painting the base, I've got a super magnet and a piece of paper in between to protect the metal from getting scratched, and that lets me hold on to something when I'm painting it. Here I'm using a semi-gloss black paint, and this is actually on the inside, and I will do the same thing on the outside afterwards. I'm not sure if the model had gloss or semi-gloss originally because it was in such bad condition. I think semi-gloss works well either way. So this is now the outer portion, and I've bumped the camera so you get to see a bit of my fancy spray booth. So I got it to a condition that's pretty good. So now we got to put some primer on the body. I'm using a white flat primer paint, but it's a hardware store can of paint. But it's a fairly large area and all the hobby stores are closed, so it's awkward to go and get some white primer. So I'm using this stuff that I was able to get from curbside pickup from Home Depot. Works pretty good. I'll still try and get some fancier primer that is designed for models, not for big things. Same thing with the hubs. I've got them on toothpicks and on a piece of cardboard. Now lets me paint them and move them all around and paint all four at once. I'll have to flip those over on the toothpicks to paint the other side. So I painted this thing, and if you look closely, it's a very rough surface on the casting that you can see once it's been primed. In many places it's very rough, so I'm going to sand it using my usual stuff, which is micro mesh. I'm using the most coarse one in this case because I'm not trying to bring it up to a polish, but I'm trying to smooth it out. Now the bright side is that paint from the hardware store is thicker than the fine paint for the hobby paint, which is what I wanted, but in this case it's better because it fills in the cracks. I mean, it still shows the contour, but after sanding it's smoother. I've sanded right down to the metal, but it no longer has, it's now a smooth surface to paint. So I put another coat of the same stuff, and that should now be smooth. I think in most cases it's better if you sand in between painting. Now this one, I'm a bit of a rebel. I'm preparing to make a windshield for this model. These Dinky Toy models are post-war models, 50 series. They didn't have windows, they didn't have seats, and I think it's a shame. So I'm going to try and make a windshield for this. It's all reversible. I'm going to make a windshield, so I'm getting prepared to cut the plastic, and I've got some plastic that's actually, there's a plastic box over soap pump dispensers that you can get, that my wife buys at Costco, and that plastic is really good. It's thick, but it's easy to cut, and it bends and folds, and it's just perfect for this case. All the windows are flat on this model because probably the original car had all flat windows, so if I cut it in the right places I can fold it up, and the plastic is going to conform as if they're the actual windows, and they'll fit onto in the model. The openings are all flat. The windshield is split windshield for that reason, because it's flat glass. You don't want to just have one big sheet of flat glass. It looks better to have two. So the windows look good. So next is the color. I decided to go online, have a look at what colors are available, and I found a nice version without spats that has a beautiful mustard yellow color, and that's the color I want to go with. So now we'll be mixing it up. I start with the prime yellow from the Mr. Hobby Aqueous paints, and I'm going to add a little bit of red to make it more of a mustard color. So I'm mixing the paints, and then I'm going to pour some yellow into the shot glass over the stirring stick so that it doesn't spill onto the edge of the jar. We add a couple drops of red and mix it up, and that's way too orangey. So I'm not going to try adding more yellow. I'm going to start with another shot glass, and this time instead of putting red, I'm going to put the orange that I just made, so at least that doesn't go to waste, and keep going until I get it to the mustard color that I want. Then I'm putting in Mr. Color Leveling Thinner. This is the thinner that when you're painting, it dries slowly, so after you've painted it has time to level and become shiny at the end. Then also I'm putting in some regular Mr. Hobby Thinner. This is the one that evaporates more quickly, so it kind of a balance between the slow drying and the fast drying. Then I can go to the paint booth and I can start painting. I start with the inside just to see if the paint is coming out properly from the airbrush, and then I move to the outside. I'm trying to go with lighter coats. I've got a new airbrush compressor and it's blowing out a lot of paint, much more than I'm used to with the old one I had with the hand pump or handheld pump. So I get it up thick enough and then I try to get it to the level where it's shiny but not running. That way you get your shiny coat. So now I have to prepare the window glass for mounting inside the cabin. So I'm punching a hole in the top, and what I'm going to do is mark the point where the hole is by putting the window inside the car, and I mark the hole position with a pencil, and I'm going to mix up some 2-part epoxy, 5-minute epoxy. This is the stuff I like to use from the dollar store. And I put it onto a pad given to us free by both our governments, my tax money at work. And I use the paper pad to mix up the glue, and once I've glued this to the roof, then I can peel the sheet of paper off of the pad and throw it in the garbage, and I've got a fresh sheet of paper to mix up the next batch of glue. So I don't have to keep looking for scraps of cardboard, which is what I used to do. So now we're going to paint some liquid chrome onto the bodywork. This stuff is I ordered on the internet. It's the one that's supposed to look like the most like chrome, very shiny. So this is my first try, so I'm having a little trouble getting it out of the pen. And I've got my very high quality Tamiya paintbrush. You need a really good paintbrush because you don't want the hairs on it to splay out and then paint in the wrong position. So it's going on pretty good. It's challenging to get it onto the bumper where it needs to be and not get it too much on the bodywork. Keep those edges without taping it. Now I also paint the door handles and the gas filler and the latch on the back tailgate. Now I'm using the Mr. Hobby clear red paint to paint over where I had painted silver on the taillights. I'm hoping it'll give a nice effect of the light shining through it and reflecting off of the silver underneath. This is a difficult thing to get, and I'm really making the best effort to get it right so paint doesn't go in the wrong places. I don't have the steadiest of hands, so I've got to brace my hand, and then I figure out ahead of time how I'm going to move the brush up and down. And I think I did a pretty good job. So now we move on to license plates. I decided I'm going to put license plates on this toy, so I printed these out with on a laser printer, and I covered it with a little bit of Scotch tape. And now I'm cutting the license plate on the top, but I'm leaving the peel back part so I can peel it back and then stick it onto the car. And we'll show a little bit better the one for the back. The front one I didn't get a very good recording, but this one I got it pretty good. So I'm putting the tape on top so it's shiny and it protects the paper. And this time I'm doing it a little differently. I've left a little bit extra, and then I use my tweezers to tease apart the backing. And I fold that back, and now I snip off the extra part of the sticky part. And now it's going to be more convenient. There we go. And I can put it onto the back of the model. Straighten it out a little bit. There we go. So it starts taking shape. Now I'm going in, and on the computer I have designed seats for the interior of the car. It never came with an interior, never came with window glass, but that's part of my Resto-Mod. Now I don't have a 3D printer, but I have a friend who does, and he offered to do it for me for free, so I sent him the drawings. He is locked down with his in-laws, who are, well, one is over 100, and he doesn't want to have company coming over, so I sent him the file. He printed this out, and I spoke to him on the driveway to pick it up from him. I'm seriously thinking about getting me a 3D printer because this is a lot of fun. So here is the product, and it's going to need a steering wheel. So what I found in the shop, this is an eyelet for hanging picture frames. So I just cut off the threaded part and file it down smooth with my trusty file. So there, it looks nice, at least from the top, which is all you're going to see. And now I've made a little piece of polystyrene plastic to hold between that. I didn't get a picture of cutting that out. And now I'm using a drill in a little pin vise, and I'm just twisting it with my fingers to get the right size of hole. And now I'm going to mount a toothpick in that hole. So I cut the tip off to get it to the right diameter, so it goes into that tiny little hole. And the whole thing I'm going to glue together using the 5-minute 2-part epoxy, the stuff I get from the dollar store, which is great. The epoxy I had when I was a youth, it was so crappy. You would mix it all up, put it on, and the stuff would never harden. This stuff in 5 minutes, like clockwork, it's hard, it's perfect. And I just love this stuff. So here didn't get a good shot, but I'm putting glue on the polystyrene, so it's on the steering wheel, and now the toothpick goes on with its own bit of epoxy. So it's standing by itself, so I'll leave it there for 5 minutes. Now I've got my lamp in front of the camera on the side, but that's the only shot I got where I put a couple drops of black in with red, because I want to have a kind of dark red, burgundy type of red, because I think that's going to go well with the yellow paint. And all of the yellow Dinky toys and Corgi toys have red interiors, so I decided that's probably the best choice. Once again, the leveling thinner goes in, and we go to the airbrush. To the spray booth. I've already primed the plastic seats. So I go on with light coats at first and let it dry a bit as I'm painting the other parts, and put on a few layers at a time. And then as we go, I can eventually put on a heavier coat that will make it shiny. Now I'm going to give the same treatment to the steering wheel. Now I've got to install the steering wheel, so I've got my trusty pin vise out and a drill. I'm trying to drill this, but I'm scratching the paint. I put a smaller drill, hoping it's easier, and I'm scratching the paint on the back of the seat, so I'll have to touch that up. In the meantime, try and protect it with some tape, and eventually I get through, and then I make it bigger with a bigger drill coming in from the other side. So that's not working, so instead of the pin vise, I've got a big vise, and that gives me a lot more leverage to spin that thing, and that finally got it through. So now I'm going to mix up some epoxy again and put a little epoxy. I speeded this up, it's a long process, so you don't have to sit watching me do the gluing. So I got some epoxy on there. I put a little piece of tape to hold it in position for 5 minutes. We're all set. I can cut off that piece of wood. So now it's going to need a sponge underneath. I have done other Dinky toys where you open it up and there's body or interior, and there's a little sponge that pushes the interior or the interior up into the body. So that's what I'm doing here. So now I've got a piece of sponge. I'll have to trim that off so that it fits the wheels. Speaking of wheels, this is what I bought online from China. These are O-rings for some special purpose, and they just happen to have exactly the right dimensions to match the tires to the wheels on these Dinky toys, the post-war Dinky toys. And they look perfect because they're an O-ring, and they're nice and soft, and they're absolutely exactly the right size. So I've got 50 of them, so that's going to be able to do a lot of toys. So there we go. I'm going to have to mushroom the end of that shaft now. There we got all the parts gathered up, and we start reassembly. Now, my favorite method of mushrooming these things is to use a small ball peen hammer. I've got pliers. I've ground little notches at the end so it grabs onto the round shaft without giving a good grip, without just being the flats and without having sharp teeth. And I've got a small ball peen hammer. I don't advise using a big one. This is a tiny little one. And I just tap it all the way around until I create a mushroom so that the wheel won't come off anymore. This is easy to do when you're not attached already to the bottom. So it's a great toy in that respect for restoration. Now I want the ends to be polished up so they look pretty. So I go to my big grinder, I put a little polishing compound, and I polish up the ends of the shaft. Both the one that I mushroomed and the original mushroom. So there you have it, nice and shiny. Now we go to the assembly. I've put a glove on because I don't want my fingerprints getting all over the model. So first I put in the windshield. I push that in. Now I've cut a little piece of a business card and punched a hole in it, and that'll kind of spread out the pressure from the nut that I'm going to put there. Now this is going to be high enough in the roof that you have to look pretty carefully to see it. And just finger tight, because if I try and tighten it anymore, it's just going to pull that grub screw off of the ceiling. So So that looks great. Now you can see I've painted the screws when we were painting the body, and they are now the same color as the body. And what you find is that many of the original rivets still have the paint from the body after they've been spread on the bottom. So this is going to mimic that look. So now I put the seats in. There I've cut the sponge. And I have to hold the wheels onto that axle because the rear axle doesn't have any mushrooms. And now I can put my screws back in. That one always gives me trouble. I don't understand. In that corner, it always wants to fall over. So let's remind you of what we started out with. Started out with a blue toy. It's play worn. No real damage, just the paint is scratched up. It's faded, it's worn out. And it's definitely in need of some tender loving care. And I believe I've done that. So let's have a look at what it looks like now. That is a beautiful toy. It looks like a candy. It's got seats inside that it never had before and windows that it also never had before. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Timo's Dinky Detailing. We'll see you next time. Be seeing you.